إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا بالزهراء البتول صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وأبويه وآبائه وأمهاتنا وأهل الكرام بارك وسلم. Alhamdulillah, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His guidance here again today to remember Him and to remember His beloved Habib sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to remember those that were beloved to the Habib sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, like the Khwajagan of Warashik in specific, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. These people were a type of people that were beloved to the heart of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. In a Sahih narration, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions, إِنَّ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَنْ يَلِينُ لَهُ قَلْبِي. And in a riwayah, the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَنْ يَلِينَ لِي قَلْبُهُ. It's two very, very interesting narrations. In the first narration, the Prophet ﷺ mentions, there are some believers amongst the ummah whose heart has become soft towards me. And that's a given, that's understood, that there are many people that will have a soft heart towards the Prophet ﷺ. Now the second narration, the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَنْ يَلِينُ لَهُ قَلْبِي. There are certain believers amongst the ummah whose my heart has become soft towards. And that's a difficult metric to understand. If you think about it, that's the heart of Rahmatul lil Alameen sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying it becomes even more soft towards these specific type of people. And if you look into the Sirat al-Mutahhara, you find this perfect manifestation found in the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Sahib al-Muslim. So it's not a historical narration, it's a hadith narration. In the Sahib al-Muslim, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so Sayyidina Miqdad and two companions, they come to Madinah al-Munawwar and they say that we presented ourselves, we were so poor, we had nothing to eat, we had nothing to drink. He said, وَقَدْ ذَهَبَتْ أَسْمَاعُنَا وَأَبْصَارُنَا. We were so parched, we were so hungry that our ears and our eyes began to give way. Like we couldn't even see properly, we couldn't even hear properly. So he says, we came to Madinah al-Munawwara and we presented ourselves to all the Sahaba that were there. And none of them accepted us, because they themselves were in a state of poverty, outward poverty. He says, then we went to Rahmatul lil Alameen sallallahu alaihi wasallam and we presented ourselves to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that please can you look after us? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepts. And then he says this became the routine. He said every night the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had 3 goats. He would tell me, he said, احتلبوا هذا اللبن. He would say, go and milk these goats and then have some for yourself, have some for your 2 friends, for your 2 companions, and leave some milk for me in Ina al-Muhammad. There was a specific container in the masjid that was called Ina al-Muhammad, the container of al-Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that would be expected to be filled up with milk, with goat's milk. He says every night the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would come out, give salam to us. If you're awake, if you're asleep, it doesn't matter, he would give salam, and then he would go towards that milk and have that milk. So that became the routine. Every night the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would come out with the Hajjat or Qiyam al-Layl, he would go to Ina al-Muhammad, have a look inside, drink the milk. He says one night, and this is in Sahih Muslim, he says one night, shaitan comes to me. Right, whether through thoughts or whether through an actual person, he doesn't say. He says, shaitan comes to me and he says, Muhammadun yaji'u ila al-ansar, fayathifunahu, fayusibu ma bihim min hajat. Right, he says that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he goes to the Ansar, they give him gifts, they give him milk, they give him everything. He doesn't need this. Ma bihi hajatun ila hadhihi al-jur'a. He doesn't need this milk. Drink it, ishrab. Right, and Sayyidina Miqdad says that I thought about it, and for a moment I go to Ali Muhammad and I take all of it down. He said, I drink the entire milk that belongs to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, once I've had it, he goes, Nadda minni shaitan. Shaitan begins to make me regret what I've done. And then shaitan comes to me, he says that Muhammad ﷺ will come out, فَيَدُعُ عَلَيْكَ فَتَهْلِكُ دُنْيَتَكَ وَآخِرَتَكَ. He says the Prophet ﷺ will come out, he will pray against you, he will curse you for what you've done, and your dunya and akhirah will be destroyed. And he says, I became so scared by what I've done. I go to he was sleeping in the masjid. He says, I had a shamla, which is like a chadar, right? He says, I had a chadar, I had a blanket. I would cover my face and my feet would show. I would cover my feet and my face would show. And all he wants to do is hide from the Prophet ﷺ when he comes out. He says, as he's doing this, he's hiding his head, he's hiding his feet. The Prophet ﷺ comes out, and as usual, as per routine, the Prophet ﷺ goes to Ina al-Muhammad, the container of al-Muhammad, picks it up, looks inside. And Sayyidina Miqdad says, Al-ana yadu alayya. Now the Prophet ﷺ is going to curse me, I am finished. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ goes towards Ina al-Muhammad, looks inside, and looks towards the sky. Sayyidina Miqdad thinks that's it, it's all over for me. The Prophet ﷺ looks towards the sky and he says, Allahumma at'im man at'amani wa asqi man asqani. Oh Allah, feed the one who feeds me and give drink to the one who gives me drink. Sayyidina Miqdad, he hears this, he's like, what's happened here? There's no dua, there's no cursing. He gets up, he jumps up, and he gets a knife, and this is all happening now in front of the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid. He says, I get up, I find a knife, run towards the goats, hoping to slaughter them, just so I can become a recipient of this dua. Oh Allah, feed the one who feeds me, give drink to the one who gives me drink. Just so I can become a recipient of this dua, he says, I jump up, get a knife, and I run towards the goat, hoping to slaughter it. He says, as I get towards the goat, I realize that the udder is now full again. Drops the knife, runs straight back, grabs Ina Ali Muhammad, runs back to the goat, milks the goat, fills it up to the brim, and takes it to the Prophet ﷺ. Now imagine this, the Prophet ﷺ seeing all this happen in front of him. And the Prophet ﷺ says, أَشَرِبْتُمْ شَرَابَكُمُ اللَّيْلَةَ, says, Oh Miqdad, did you have your drink last night? He says, Ya Rasulullah, ishrab, just drink, don't ask me the question. He says, Ya Rasulullah, ishrab. The Prophet ﷺ says, أَشَرِبْتُمْ شَرَابَكُمُ اللَّيْلَةَ, have you had your drink last night? He says, Ya Rasulullah, ishrab, drink. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ begins to drink. When he drinks it, and Sayyidina Miqdad says, I realize I've now become the recipient of this dua. That oh Allah, feed the one who feeds me, give drink to the one who gives me drink. Once I realized I become a recipient, he goes, Dahikta, I began to laugh. I laughed so much, حتى ألقيت نفسي على الأرض. I laughed so much, I threw myself on the floor, laughing in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ looks at me laughing. He says, I managed to compose myself. I get back up, and the Prophet ﷺ says, إحدى سوآتك يا مقداد. This is one of your mischiefs, Ya Miqdad. Right? And then he begins to narrate the entire story. He says, Ya Rasulullah, I became scared. I thought you were going to curse me. He mentions the entire story. He relays it back to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ responds, he says, مَا هَذِهِ إِلَّا رَحْمَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. This is nothing except mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهَلْ أَذَنْتَنِي أَن نُوقِظْ صَاحِبَيْنِ لِي. Like, do you give me permission that we wake up our two guests, our two other friends, and give them some milk as well? He says, Ya Rasulullah, I don't care who you give it to now, as long as I become the recipient of this dua. You know, like, and the ulama, they speak about this in a very particular way. They say, what was Shaitan's biggest trick in all of this? Was it to convince him to steal from the Prophet ﷺ? They say, no. The biggest trick of Shaitan was to make Sayyidina Miqdad lose hope in the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ. For him to assume that the Prophet ﷺ will curse him. It's impossible. That's the kind of heart that the Prophet ﷺ has. He does not become upset over things like this with his ummah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? Like Sayyidina Ghawth al-Azam, he mentioned it as an athar. He says, the Prophet ﷺ mentions as a type of athar, he says, مَا مِن مُسْلِمٍ يُشَاكُ بِشَوْكَةٍ إِلَّا وَجَدْتُ أَلَمَهَا. That the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said that there is not a single Muslim in this ummah, there is not a single Muslim in this ummah who is hit with a prick of a thorn except إِلَّا وَجَدْتُ أَلَمَهَا, except I feel its pain. Right? There are certain people in this ummah that can't express what's on their heart. They can't express it on their tongue what's in their heart. They don't know, the only language they have is the language of tears. But you should know that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knows and he understands. Khwaja Hassan Nizami radiallahu, he mentions as a dream, he says that I had a dream and I see that there's an ocean of hearts in front of me, an entire sea of hearts in front of me. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is picking one up, plastering it, bandaging it, puts it down. Picks up another heart, bandages it, puts it down. Picks up another heart, bandages it, plasters it, puts it down. And then he says to Khwaja Hassan Nizami, come my son, let's do this together. And the job of prophecy is to look after your hearts. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Just as a final narration before I finish, one day Sayyidah Aisha, sallallahu alayha, she says that I saw the Prophet sallallahu in the Sahib of Gohar. She said that I saw the Prophet sallallahu and his face was beaming with light. He was so happy. And I said, Ya Rasulullah, ud'u li. Ya Rasulullah, pray for me. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ says that Allahumma ghfir li Aisha ma taqaddama min dhanbiha wa ma ta'akharat wa ma a'lanat wa ma asarrat. Oh Allah, forgive all of Aisha's sins. The ones that she's done in the past, the one that she'll do in the future. The one that she's announced, done publicly, and the one that she's done privately. And Sayyidah Aisha begins to laugh. She's so happy with this dua. She begins to laugh and she throws herself onto the lap of the Prophet ﷺ. Her head falls into the lap of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Yasurruki du'a ya Aisha. Does this dua make you happy, O Aisha? She says, why wouldn't it make you happy? And then the Prophet ﷺ gives us a glad tidings. He says, Wallahi inna da'watu ummati fi kulli salat. I swear by Allah, this is a dua that I make for my entire ummah, every single salah. And so you should know that heart ﷺ is not a heart like any other heart. That's the heart of the Rasul ﷺ. And this is what we've come here to achieve, to become from that second category. So we have tender hearts towards the Rasul ﷺ, that's fine. But to have Rahmatul Alameen, that extremely tender, soft heart become even more tender and soft towards us. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. ما شاء الله.